EQ is the tool to get a professional sounding mix. In this video, I'm going to bring you my top 5 do's and don'ts for EQ. Welcome back to the Band Guide, where we use GarageBand to create professional sounding music. I'm your band guy, Colin. Let's dive in. Before we jump in, I wasn't kidding. EQ is the tool for creating a professional sounding mix. And I want to help you with EQ as much as I can. I've created an entire course called EQ Expert. And my whole goal with this course is to turn you into an EQ expert. EQ is all about knowing how to balance sound, knowing what sources need to sound as good as possible, and it's all subtle changes. So you really need to know what's going on with EQ, behind the scenes, how we hear sound, and how to use EQ to get the results that you want. This course is designed to help you do that, to walk you through everything you need to know to truly become an EQ expert. There's a link in the description below. This course is not out yet, but if you want to get on the wait list so you're the first to hear about it, I'll even send you a free EQ cheat sheet. So in the meantime, you can start getting better mixes with EQ right now. So there's a link in the description below. Be sure to sign up for the wait list and get that free EQ cheat sheet. And in the meantime, let's dive into some do's and don'ts. Don't number 1, don't EQ exclusively in solo. No one is going to hear your track in solo. They're not going to hear that acoustic guitar in solo or that electric guitar in solo. They're going to hear your final track, everything all together. And it doesn't matter how good something sounds in solo. If you bring it into the context of the mix and all the things that sounded great in solo aren't there in the context of the mix, you need to spend some time EQing in the context of the mix. Which brings me to do number 1, EQ in the context of the mix. Solo to find specific frequencies, but then EQ in the context of the mix. So if you know that there's some mid-rangey stuff that's sounding weird to you, go into solo, find those specific frequencies, notch them out a little bit, but then spend most of your time listening to everything all together. If you need to find frequencies and you're not exactly sure where they are, try boosting the gain on the EQ and finding those frequencies and then resetting the gain. Or try muting something and seeing if was that the source that was getting in the way in the context of the mix. Don't just spend all of your time in solo because no one's going to hear the parts of your song in solo. Don't number 2, don't use EQ presets. EQ presets can't possibly know what your sound sounds like. They don't know what your acoustic guitar sounds like, what your mic sounds like, what the mic placement sounds like. They don't know how it sounds. So how could it possibly be tailor fit to sound as good as possible? There is an equal chance that it's going to boost things that it should cut for you. There's just no way that it could possibly know how to get the best sound possible. Now, there are some ways you can use EQ presets, like EQ effects. EQ presets can do great effects for you very, very quickly. But when it comes to EQing, do number 2 is trust your ears. Your ears know what sound good and what don't. And so trust your ears, trust your instincts, and use those to set your EQ settings to sound as good as possible. You're not going to boost something that sounds bad, but an EQ preset might. So trust your ears. Don't number 3, don't get too technical. This is music. You need to focus on making music. You can get bogged down by technicalities, what you should do, what you shouldn't do, what science tells me I should do. There's things that you need to learn that will help you get the most out of your EQ, but you don't want to get too technical. Learn what you need to learn and then trust your ears. And that's exactly do number 3. Learn enough, then trust your ears. Don't number 4, don't EQ every channel. Not every channel needs it. Listen first, use your ears first and decide, does this need EQ? And then before you even put the EQ on, what kind of EQ am I looking for? Is it too bassy? Is there some muddiness? Is there some boxiness? Is it harsh in the high end? Know that before you even put the EQ on so that your EQ moves are specific and tailored to the sound. So do number 3, do listen to the sound and decide if it needs EQ. And don't number 5, don't sweep aimlessly looking for things that sound bad. I used to do this all the time and I'd end up with a billion little notches in every one of my channels. The thing is, if you boost a signal with a tight cue and sweep around, everything's gonna sound weird. You're gonna wanna cut everything. So my do's for this are listen, identify the EQ zone where you are hearing issues, and then sweep within that frequency range to find the specific frequency that's bothering you. So it's okay to use sweeping to find things, but if you sweep aimlessly, you're going to find a billion things, and the thing is that they don't actually sound bad in the context of the whole sound, but they sound bad when you've boosted it with a tight cue. There's just no two ways around it. But if you're narrow in what you're looking at, you'll find the frequencies that are bothering you when you're listening to it and using your ears, trusting your judgment. You'll get the best EQ sound possible. Next week, I'm going to bring you a sneak peek into EQ Expert. I'm going to bring out an entire lesson for you all about those EQ zones I just talked about. It's going to go in depth on those zones so you can better understand them and better use them to better use your EQ. Now, if you're serious about getting the best EQ sound possible, to using it and using it to its full potential, be sure to get on the wait list to be the first to hear about EQ Expert. There's a link in the description below, and I'll send you a free EQ cheat sheet today to help you start getting better mixes in the meantime. EQ is definitely the tool to get professional sounding mixes, and I want you to get the most out of it possible. So be sure to get on the wait list for EQ Expert and get your free EQ cheat sheet from the link in the description below. And in the meantime, I want to ask you, what don'ts are you guilty of when it comes to EQ? And are there any do's that you've already been doing? Do's that you've been doing? Let me know in the comments below. I want to hear from you. If this video was helpful for you, be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you next week with a sneak peek into EQ Expert.